Attention Caribbean authors and creators, are you looking to elevate your literary journey? This is Kevin George, your host and presenter from TLC Tropical Literature Creatives, and I'm thrilled to share an exciting opportunity with you, introducing our bespoke promotional services designed exclusively for authors of Caribbean heritage. Whether you're a seasoned professional or a rising star, we're here to amplify your voice. From getting the word out about your book launch, your self-publishing services, or workshops, to sharing services that you offer to fellow authors and creatives. Visit our website or reach out to us today to explore how we can tailor our expertise to showcase your literary brilliance. Let's unlock the next chapter of success together. Greetings, listenership. Welcome to TLC Tropical Literature Creatives, the program where we interview Caribbean authors about themselves and their literary works. Today we have with us Sharon Milagro Marshall, author of the book A Return to Roots, CuBajans in Barbados. Sharon, welcome to Tropical Literature Creators.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for having me. And I want to congratulate you on your efforts to promote the Caribbean literature.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Just for the listenership who are tuning in, which Caribbean island do you have ties to?
If you detect regional accents, you will know that I'm from Barbados. I was born and raised in Barbados, and I also have family ties to Cuba.
Okay. For those who don't know too much about the book, that will be explained in times to come. Just a little bit about Barbados. If it is, for example, I'm coming to Barbados for the first time, what would you recommend that I try? What food or maybe a place that I go to visit?
You should definitely try to be here a Friday night because you wouldn't want to miss the Oystins fish fry. It's a location where local fish vendors sell a variety of seafood products, fish, shrimp, lobster, you name it. And it's in a very convivial atmosphere. It's an open air atmosphere right next to the sea. And each vendor has their stall and they sell their own specialties. And there's music and entertainment generally. And all roads lead to Oystins on Friday nights.
Okay. So makes mental note. When we're going to Barbados, make sure it's on a Friday night. Tell us a bit about yourself, Sharon, because we know that you're an award-winning journalist, public relations executive. Can you tell us something about yourself that you won't find like on social media or Facebook or anything like that?
Well, there's probably a lot that you wouldn't find on social media because I have a very small social media footprint. I am on LinkedIn and that's about it. Professional site. I do have a Facebook account, but I'm not active on Facebook. And I do have an Instagram account, which I acquired when I was working as the communications coordinator for the UNCTAD conference, which was held in Barbados a couple years ago. So because of my professional obligations, I was forced to open accounts on these social media platforms.
No, you make it sound like, because of your professional obligations, like someone's twisting your arm, you've got to do this. And you're like, no, I don't.
Kind of. I had stoutly resisted, but I recognize the value of social media, although I'm quite appalled at times about how it's used.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
But I started working as a journalist in Barbados in 1981 after I returned from the United States. I did my undergraduate degree at Howard University, majoring in journalism, mass comm. And promptly after I graduated, I began working as a flight attendant with Pan American World Airways. And I went to Honolulu for training. And after training, I was assigned to the San Francisco base. So I did that for a couple of years and then decided that it was time to come back to Barbados and to journalism.
Okay. If it's one thing I recognize, your approach, to be honest, at first I thought your profession was that of maybe like a medical professional, because as I'm going through your book, you identify that your approach you interview persons, you make sure that they are able to get the reviews of what it is that you would have interviewed, and then with their approval, you go ahead with the process. It seems very clinical. and very professional. So that's why at first I thought you were a medical practitioner, only to learn that, that you're a journalist. And I mean, not taking away from your journalism training or anything like that, but it just speaks about your approach, very clinical, very professional, and very factual. It seems that you're sort of like an investigator.
Indeed, that's what the research is all about. And I earned my PhD in history at the University of the West Indies. I attended the Cave Hill campus. And as a result, I have the right to use the title doctor. And I don't want to confuse people. I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a doctor of philosophy.
No, I mean, it seems kind of fitting all the same. But like I said, when you look at your style in terms of the interviews, etc., it's like, this person is applies professionalism to the task that it is that they're doing. But let's talk a little bit about the book itself, A Return to Roots. Can you tell us a bit about the book for the persons who are just tuning in who don't know anything about the book?
A Return to Roots, CuBajans in Barbados, is a social history of Barbadians, or rather Cubans of Barbadian descent who have come here to live. And A Return to Roots is a follow-up to my very first published book, which was called Tell My Mother I Gone to Cuba, Stories of Early 20th Century Migration from Barbados. And that book was about the West Indians who migrated to Cuba in the early part of the 20th century to work primarily in the sugar industry in Cuba. And my maternal grandparents were among those persons who migrated to Cuba, hence my links with Cuba. And yes, and my mother was the first CuBajan that I knew because she was born in Cuba and came to Barbados at the age of 9. And I always took for granted my family history. My uncles and aunt spoke Spanish.
Yeah.
And it was only when I was on assignment for the Caribbean Broadcasting Union in Cuba where I went to a town called Baragua, which is in Ciego de Ávila province in the middle of Cuba, and met all of the West Indian descendants. Some of the original migrants were still alive at that time, and I was able to interview them for features broadcast on Caribscope on the CBU television program.
I remember that. I remember Caribscope. Yes.
Yes. So that's where the light bulb went off, and it was, oh, so this is much wider than my family's history. And that's when I started doing research. And then I enrolled at the university, and the basis of that first book was the research which I conducted for my PhD thesis.
I mean, I guess I can appreciate your professional approach to this, but as you say that, and as you indicate in your book, it seems that you're really heavily invested personally as well.
Indeed.
I mean, and the names that you mentioned, I mean, even the term CuBajans, can you tell us a bit about the origin of that term?
My husband, Pedro Hustis, is the person that I first used that expression. Pedro is someone whom I met while I was conducting research for my PhD in Guantanamo, Cuba. And when we first encountered each other, I had just arrived at the hotel, and I saw this tall, dark, handsome young man approaching me in the dining room wearing a Bob Marley t-shirt. And I thought, any fan of Bob Marley I have time for. And he introduced himself. He came up and he said, oh, the bartender told me there's a lady from Jamaica here. And I said, I am not from Jamaica. I'm from Barbados. And he said, oh, my grandfather was from Barbados. And that's the beginning of our relationship. And on the 26th of May, we would have been married 22 years.
Well, that's a long time. That's, whoa.
Yes, I invited him to Barbados to see the land of his ancestors, and he remained here, and he
never went back.
Well, just to visit, just to visit. But yeah, he considers himself Cuban and Bajan, so that's an amalgam of the two nationalities, Cuban and CuBajan.
Okay. I mean, as we talk more, I just see how invested you are in the project.
Indeed.
Can you tell us a bit more about how the book came to be? I mean, in the book you said that you had written one book and then someone had, well, let me not speak the rest. Yes, continue.
Yes. Okay. The first book, which really was a labor of love, it was completed while I was working in the Cayman Islands because my husband stayed in Barbados, and I finally found the time to work seriously on writing up the research that I had done. And during the launch, the then Cuban ambassador said, "Well, you know, your work has only just begun. You need to write a book about the reverse migration, about the Cubans who have come to live in Barbados in the land of their ancestors." And I thought, yeah, right. This has been such a process. I wasn't eager to begin again, but it seems that the seed was planted there.
Mhm.
And eventually, I began working seriously on this book. And I'm so grateful that I did, because in the same way that I am humbled by the fact that the persons whom I interviewed for the first book trusted me to be the vessel through which their stories are told. Similarly, the persons whom I've interviewed in the second book have told their stories about acceptance or non-acceptance by Barbadians because they come with a Cuban accent, they speak a different language, and sometimes are not as well received as they would have hoped, but they persevered, they made lives for themselves. And unfortunately, two of the persons whom I interviewed are no longer alive. And I'm so happy that I was able to capture their stories and that it remains for the record in this book, which is accessible to anyone who's interested in the topic.
I mean, you would have interviewed like a number of persons, which, we can see in the book, etc. Are there any other stories that stand out compared to the others that you hold to a bit more personally?
My husband wouldn't forgive me if I didn't say his story because he's one of the persons whom I interviewed for the book. But the age range of the persons whom I interviewed was from 20s to 90s. The oldest person, she just turned 98 this
Mm.
past December and is still alive, fully in possession of her mind and a very resourceful sort of person. And the youngest graduated from the Barbados Community College with a degree in mass comm. So their stories ranging from people who have come back to Barbados in the 1930s. Obviously, the 98-year-old woman, she came as a 12-year-old,
Yeah.
1936, and people who came in the 2000s. So it's quite a range. So both men and women, and from various parts of Cuba where the West Indians settled. They were not only Barbadians, there were people from Trinidad, there were people from Jamaica primarily,
Really?
uh, indeed, and Antigua, all over the West Indies as it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And these people maintained their culture. They cooked the kinds of foods that they cooked back at home if they were able to get the ingredients. I mean, they made sorrel and the black cake and cuckoo, the Barbadian national dish. They
Cool.
didn't have the flying fish. Yes,
Some Trinidadians listening to this now, and they will probably have some words with me after this when I talk about
indeed, indeed, especially at this current time. But yeah, and these people have had an influence on the Cuban culture in some respects, planting the maypole, singing some of the folk songs
Mhm.
that are now less popular at this time, but were quite prolific during the early 20th century. So in many ways, that culture was preserved in these isolated environments where the West Indies tended to gather. And they played cricket. They traveled from various neighborhoods and had tournaments. They would spend the weekend with other West Indians in various municipalities and then go back on Sunday evening to be ready for work on Monday morning. Yeah, so quite a bit of West Indian heritage is to be found in Cuba.
No, I mean that's interesting. A question in terms of I mean West Indian heritage being found in Cuba, could you say the same as you could find in Barbados, certain habits, certain practices that are practiced in Cuba? Would they have like been transitioned well into Barbados, into Bajan culture from your observation?
Yeah, there's been some adaptations, but there's a Fiesta Latina on Friday nights where many of the Latin people in Barbados go to dance salsa, and you will find a number of Cubans there. There are some people who are practicing the Orisha religions, which they brought from Cuba, and different elements of Cuban culture can be found in Barbados, even though it is a small community.
Okay, okay. I mean, has anyone reached out to you since your book has been written to like maybe the descendants of the persons who you would have interviewed, because you indicated one of the persons who stand out, she's 90 years old, faculty is intact and everything. I mean, has there been any other persons, grandchildren, children who would have reached out and who would have gotten copies of the book and said, hey, I really appreciate this and I'm really glad that their stories have been preserved in this format that we can just go to, that is there for everyone to see? Has anyone reached out to you?
I can't say that the descendants have reached out to me, but I know that the people whom I interviewed have bought copies for their children overseas.
Yeah.
Frank Philo, he has a daughter in the UK, and he made sure that she had copies. Isabel Dean, one of the persons whom I interviewed, she is actually of St. Lucian Cuban heritage. She went from Cuba to St. Lucia and then married a Bajan and came to Barbados.
Yeah.
So yes, she has her daughter lives in Zambia and a son in Canada. So they have copies of the book and are very proud that their parents have been honored in this way, let me say, that their stories are deemed important enough to be committed to the page. And when I had the launch at UE for this book in April last year,
Yeah.
uh, one of them, Nelson Goddard, said, my story is in a book, with a sense of awe. My story is in a book. And I felt really, really humbled at his acknowledgement of what I was able to achieve.
Obviously, the interviews came together over time. How long did it take you to get this book published, like from conception to the launch last year?
It, I can't say that it was a linear process, but I did have both books published by University of the West Indies Press,
Oh,
and there's a process. You submit a statement of interest, saying what the research is about and asking would they be interested in this publication. And then you have to submit the manuscript, and it is considered by a committee, which the publications committee, which deems it either suitable for publication as is, suitable for publication, but with some amendments, or not suitable at all. So I was fortunate to have two books approved and published by UE Press.
okay, okay.
Yeah, so that process takes time. Uh, there is a peer review, and the manuscript is submitted to persons in the field who go through and make their own assessment of the manuscript. So that process takes time. They're teaching or involved in other activities, and you have to wait until they find the time to get around to your work.
Yeah.
And then this happened during COVID. One reviewer had to be replaced, so there was a little bit of a delay.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was published, and the reviews have been quite good.
Outside of UE Press, if it is that we wanted to get copies of your book, where could we get them?
Yes, it's available on online outlets like Amazon.com. Yeah, people over Barnes and Noble, a variety of online book retailers have these titles in their list of books. Yeah.
These stories here seem really significant. Was Yui like your first option, or were you playing with the ideas of getting them purchased by like maybe another publishing house or so if it didn't go through with Yui?
I thought of Yui initially because it's an academic publisher, and the work, as I said, came about because of the research my doctoral research. So I thought it was a natural fit.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, in addition to your research, I mean, who did you work together with in terms of putting it all together?
Me?
Oh, I mean, so the covers, design, and everything. I mean, that's all you.
Well, then let me clarify. I thought you meant the contents, but in terms of the publication, yes, there was an editor, Siobhan Hearn, who worked on both books with me, and they submitted some designs which the graphic artist had done, and I had the approval. The first copy that I received, the first design, it was like very drab and didn't convey the liveliness of this Cuban Barbadian culture. And I made some suggestions for how it could be enlivened, and I submitted the cover photograph and gave some ideas for having the flags of the two countries. So I had a hand in the ultimate cover design. Yeah, for both books.
Okay. So in addition to putting it all together, you had like a hand in the creative process as well, like design, etc. Is this like how it usually is with UE Press, or is it something like in your case they just give you creative control to have a hand?
No, I believe this is a standard procedure.
Okay.
I believe so. Yeah.
Like I said, I thought that your interviews and everything were very clinical, and obviously your writing here is significant. For persons who might just go through the book and who might just say, yes, well, I think I want to do something like this, the way that she's very clinical about her approaches, etc., and they want to put together a work of literature similar to it. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I think methodology is important, and if you want to be taken seriously, you have to demonstrate that you have done the research, that you've checked and double checked. And these are people's personal stories. And you want them to have a hand in saying, okay, this is accurate, this is not accurate. When you record people, you might put your own interpretation on something that they said. So I think it's important that you give them an opportunity to confirm, yes, this is what I said, this is what I meant. And yeah, I think that's important.
Okay.
Yes, I think it's important too to check your source material. The publication was delayed because one of the proofreaders at UE Press asked, is this, it was a word, a simple word, is this what was actually written? So then I had to go back to the archives department and go back to the original source. And yes, in fact, there was a the in front of this word. So it's the minutest detail like that. But I think it's important because it gives you the comfort of knowing that what you've written is accurate.
Yes, of course. To know that, that amount of effort goes into writing and stuff. Yeah. So if I see your name on any document, I know for sure. Yeah, that's thorough. That is thorough.
Yes.
I mean, in your situation, would you say that having like a personal investment in projects that they give you like motivation to get it done?
Indeed, it fuels a passion, and it can be quite drudgery looking through documents in the archives. You're looking for nuggets, you're excavating, and then when you find something, it is pure joy. So that has been my experience. I would clear my day and get down to the archives department so that I would be there as soon as they open so that I could maximize my time. I would take my lunch and very grudgingly step out onto the balcony at lunchtime when my stomach was telling me it was time to eat, grab something and come back in because there were so many more documents to look through. Unfortunately, with COVID, now you have to make an appointment. You can't spend the whole day But I was fortunate that in the period during which I was conducting this research that I had free reign.
Okay, okay. I mean, well, of course, that worked to your benefit. So yeah, we can't argue with that. So far, you've produced two really interesting books of literature. What's next for Sharon?
Actually, subsequent to the publication of this book, I self-published one, uh, yes, and it's called Journeys Around the World for Love and Money. And
Mhm.
it's about my travels as a flight attendant going to India on my first trip, on being on layover in Auckland, New Zealand, and seeing a Maori guy with a Bob Marley button and playing Bob Marley's music on a
I
beatbox and following him because this is Bob Marley's music here in New Zealand. Yes.
Mhm.
Uh, when I worked as a journalist with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, I went on assignment to interview Maurice Bishop in Grenada and Forbes Burnham in Guyana. And I wrote an article because this was for the 10th anniversary of CARICOM. I produced a documentary. And those are some of the adventures. My first trip to Africa, going to Senegal, and then subsequently going to South Africa with Sir Wes Hall, the great Barbadian fast bowler.
Mhm.
And yeah, so many of my travel stories I compiled into this book, which is really my life story,
I'm making
my
a
life
little.
of travel. So
I'm,
I did that, and I don't know if I have another book in me. I'm at the moment I'm resting before before the next inspiration comes.
no, I mean, this same book, where can we get copies of it? Because it sounds really interesting.
Unfortunately, it's only available in Barbados.
Oh.
I, at the moment, I also have the ISBN for an ebook, which I hope to publish. I haven't given myself a deadline, but I still have some copies, some hard copies, which I'm selling, and they're available at bookstores in Barbados.
Okay, okay.
And yes, and I have also filled orders from people in other countries. In fact, 2 Saturdays ago, I was on a writers' clinic, which is hosted by the National Cultural Foundation of Barbados once a month. And there was someone from Toronto who was also in on that Zoom meeting. And after I'd made a comment, he said, "Is this the same Sharon Marshall who wrote Journeys?" And I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Well, I've heard about this book and I want to get a copy. How do I get a copy?" And he said, "Okay, I have a friend in Barbados who's coming to Toronto next week. The guy is traveling tomorrow, Monday." And he came and got a copy of the book from me to take to Canada. I've sent copies to the United States. I've sent copies to the UK, to the Cayman
Mhm.
Islands. So my friends and relatives around the world have received copies of the book.
After
Yeah,
the program, you'll have to be in touch because it sounds interesting. I wouldn't mind getting a copy myself.
yes. If I can find out what the cost of postage is,
Hmm.
and we can make some arrangements.
Good, 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 good. All right, Sharon, it's been a pleasure having you on our program. Your company was indeed appreciated. I mean, your literature, it is very influential. It is a very big consequence. And we can't help but, commend you for the efforts that you put into this, as well as the persons who you would have interviewed as well. So that pretty much brings us to the end of our program. Anything that you'd want to share to the listeners at this point in time who are listening?
I just want to say that the Caribbean is a unique place with a blend of many cultures, and we ought to be memorializing and celebrating our Caribbean culture.
Thank you very much for those words, Sharon.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. All right. You take care.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye. You've been listening to TLC, Tropical Literature Creators. If you've heard something of interest or something you like, reach out to us. reach out to our authors, follow us on social media. We look forward to hearing from you.